Welcome to RealGM Radio. Mo Dakhil is here. I'm Wes Goldberg. We're predicting the top 10 defenses in the NBA next season. Let's jump in. All right, welcome to RealGM Radio. I'm Wes Goldberg. Thanks for listening and subscribing on your favorite podcast app and on our new YouTube channel. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Joining me today, he's a must-follow on NBA Twitter and on Twitch. He's a must-read at Bleacher Report and The Athletic. That is, if you want to get smarter about basketball. Someone who once called Doc Rivers his boss. It's Mo Dakhil. Mo, how's it going, buddy?
Going well. Just getting ready for the season to get started, and we're back in the swing of things.
We are really getting back in the swing of things, and now is sort of the time of year where you start looking ahead. You're like, all right, how do I think this season is going to play out? You start doing your preseason predictions. Who do I think is going to win MVP? I was doing this media poll thing earlier, and it was like, who do you think is going to win Coach of the Year? And at the risk of going off on a tangent at the very beginning of this episode, I'm like, I have no idea who's going to win Coach of the Year. Like, it feels like it could be any number. That's maybe the most narrative-driven award, and I'm like, I don't know how the season's going to play out, so I have no idea. It doesn't usually go to the coach with the most wins anymore. It used to do that. Now, not so much.
No, but I think this is going to be the year. It's probably going to be. I'm just going to keep betting Spo until Spo wins. Do it. Having never won it is still flabbergasting to me.
It feels like we're due for just give it to this guy kind of year, right? Like
just lifetime achievement award.
They should have those. I've made the argument before. I think if the Heat get to like 52 wins, then he can get it, but that's a big if. But that's not what we're talking about today. We are building off of our episode last week. We had Yahoo Sports' Dan Devine on the show last week to predict the top 10 offenses next season. Today, we're doing the defensive side of the ball. So what the basic premise here is, how do we think the top 10 in defensive rating is going to fall by the end of next season? So, Mo, I've got my list prepared, but before we get into my top 10, I do have some honorable mentions. Okay. You know what? Even before we get to that, just a refresher on how the top 10 defenses finished the year last season. So Minnesota was number 1, Orlando number 2, Boston, Oklahoma City, Miami, Cleveland, Houston, New Orleans, Denver, and then New York. So that was your top 10. And I was going off of the cleaning.
A different list. Oh, cleaning the glass. Okay, I was confused because I had the NBA.com list. I was like, wait a minute.
What was the difference between because cleaning the glass filters out garbage time for those people who don't know, but what was the difference?
Boston was 2, Houston was 10, and I don't know where the miss was.
Right. Did you have Denver? Was Denver in the top 10?
Denver was 8. So I'll just read it to you. It'll be easier instead of playing this guessing game. Minnesota 1, Boston 2, Orlando 3, Oklahoma City 4, Miami 5, New Orleans 6, Cleveland 7, Denver 8, Knicks 9, Houston 10.
Close enough. But so that's last year's top 10. I have some honorable mentions before we get into our predictions for this year's top 10 defensive rating. I have Houston dropping out. I've got New Orleans dropping out. So I don't have them finishing in my top 10 this year. There are teams that I need to get into the top 10. So more, this was a question of who do I think is going to fall out. I don't know it'll be by much. Sure. Houston, they had some good 3-point shooting luck last year. If that goes the other way, I know Ime had them playing better in transition defensively and things like that. I don't know. It didn't feel quite enough real for me to feel good about them putting in my top 10 this year. Although I do like some of the personnel. I like the coaching. I like kind of a lot of the things that they have going on. Just didn't feel good enough about them continuing some of that good 3-point shooting luck enough to get them into my top 10. I also had New Orleans dropping out because they don't have a center anymore.
Right.
So
that's a fair question.
It feels like it's a big deal. 2 other teams that I had in my honorable mention, Mo, I had Golden State because I kind of like some of the new players, and I think they're going to try to be a little bit more defensive leaning this year, potentially, but they're too small. There's too many questions up and down the roster. They're well coached. They have Draymond. Just couldn't get him into my top 10, though. And then I have the Clippers, and I actually think the Clippers have the personnel to easily be in the top 10 in defensive rating. I'm just worried about Kawhi's health, so I don't bet on the Clippers.
You can't bank on the Clippers. period. Anytime. Like, it's just with the health thing, they're one of the two teams where it's just like, man, can't bet on you just because we don't know if you're who's playing every night.
If you do it, congrats, great. We'll throw a parade for you, but I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to have them in any of my predictions. It's just not going to happen. I have 2 rules. One of them is never trust the Clippers. So let's jump right into the top 10. Mo, number 10, I have the Philadelphia 76ers. And I was a little surprised that I had them here, like in my top 10 at all. But they added Paul George and Caleb Martin. Kelly Oubre is coming back. Kyle Lowry's back for another year. He's kind of a coach on the floor kind of guy. Kelly Oubre was good for them last season, especially I thought towards the end of last season, defensively, I mean. And obviously he was good too, but we're talking about defense here. I just think that they have a lot of weapons here. I think they have a lot of tools, especially on the wing. They were on the fringe of the top 10 when Joel Embiid was healthy last season. They added Andre Drummond also behind Embiid, who's going to help some of those non-Embiid minutes. Nick Nurse is established as a great defensive coach. And as long as Embiid plays, I don't know, 60 to 70 games, which is more than what he played last year, I think their floor is pretty high. And so I kind of shoehorned them into the top 10 here.
I'm with you in terms of talent, but the funny thing is they're the other team I don't bet on
Right.
when it comes to, because you just don't know with injuries. And, Embiid hasn't been able to stay healthy all year. Doesn't get talked about a lot. Paul George doesn't stay healthy a lot. So I think, we're kind of sleeping on that. So now they've added 2 guys that we have to add to that variable. If they're healthy for 90% of the season, I think they're higher than 10 even. I think they have the talent level to be higher than that. But it's a bet that you're taking where you're looking at it going like, shoot, man, like, are we going to have enough games for these guys? Like, I think they should limit Embiid's games. I think they need him healthy by the playoffs. I think they need to be smart about how they play him, how they use him. I don't think he should play 70-something games this season. It's honestly, I think they should. It'll drive everybody nuts, but they should load manage him because I want to see what he looks like healthy in the playoffs. And playing a lot of games has not been something that's really helped him.
I agree with everything you're saying. I probably have a little bit more of a bias for Philadelphia than I do for the LA Clippers that I personally just can't even explain. I have no idea why that exists, but it exists. I just had and that's why I said I'm surprised I had him in my top 10. This is more of me, I don't know, betting on that infrastructure a little bit more than some of the honorable mention teams that I had, and I was like, I don't really know who my top 10 is going to be. I feel pretty good about my top 9. The 10th one, I was kind of like Philadelphia is like the best honorable mention. If we really want to,
that was really what it was. You just I have to put somebody at 10. Has to be a top 10, not a top 9.
You know what? And I make the rules. Why can't it be not a top 9? This is my show. I can make it a top 9. That'll be like
It's actually a conversation I just heard on another podcast. We like round numbers. We like our numbers to end with 10. We like it, 15. Right. We don't do top 14. We don't do top 13. Like, we like it in sports in particular. We like it to have the even end, the top 10 or a top 5. We do it in increments of 5.
Increments of 5, increments of 10 are even more of an accomplishment. You're absolutely right. But you know what? We could break rules here. It's a new era of NBA analysis. Woj's retired. Like, we could do whatever we want.
I mean, we got to talk about that. Woj retiring to become the GM of the St. Bonaventure team. Like, I don't know what. I want to know what news broke him where he's like, I'm done. I'm done. I'm going to go take a GM job for a very low major college, maybe mid-major. I don't know. I don't watch enough college basketball.
Oh, go Bonnies.
Yeah, whatever. But like low level stuff I just want to know what source broke him and what was the news that they're like, we need you to leak this. And he was like, no, I'm out.
Right. You know what? I don't need to do this. No, it was like trying to figure out like the extension news and all this kind of stuff or whatever. I honestly, again, new tangent. That's okay. I don't mind. I'm surprised he lasted that long. That job is grueling, man. Like, that is a no sleep job. And he's actually going to a job in college where you have to deal with the NIL stuff that forced like Nick Saban out. Now, granted, the extremes of being the head coach for Alabama football and doing whatever he's doing for St. Bonaventure men's basketball, I think is probably going to be a different level of stress. But he's like, NIL, that seems like way less stressful than being the leading newsbreaker 24/7, 365. That tells you how stressful that job was.
Wes, how big do you think the St. Bonaventure NIL treasure chest is? Can we?
It's all Woj's money now. The guy was making $7 million a year at ESPN.
Yeah, like what are we doing? Like, come on, man. Like it's talking about maybe they get enough, and it's like what, $1 million, $2 million? Like it's not a whole thing. And I have opinions on Saban, but we can save that for another day. I'll take us on too many tangents.
Is it anti or pro? You can just tell me that.
Probably anti.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm a Dolphins fan, so he left us high and dry. So you're preaching to the choir here. So you're going pro Eric Spoelstra, anti Nick Saban. You know your market. Mo. Speaking of, actually, wait, before I get to the Heat, number 9 on my list, top 10 defenses in the league next season according to defensive rating. I've got Cleveland. This is a team that has hung its hat on the defensive end the last several years. They were number 1 in defensive rating 2 years ago. They were number 6 last year, again, according to Cleaning the Glass, basically the same according to NBA.com's defensive rating metric. But as long as they have Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen, which was a little bit of a question this summer, we didn't know if they were going to hold on to both of them. They decided, you know what, let's just run it back. We got those two. We got Garland. We got Donovan Mitchell. We got some good pieces coming off the bench for us. I know there's a coaching change. You've got Atkinson there instead of JB Bickerstaff, but I just feel like their infrastructure is already there. And I think that whatever they were doing defensively wasn't the question in Cleveland, right? It was the offensive question. So it wouldn't surprise me if Atkinson was just like, defensive playbook, not touching it. Just gonna let us keep doing the same thing that basically Steve Kerr did when he took over from Mark Jackson in Golden State. And of course, Atkinson worked under Steve Kerr the last couple of years, where Steve Kerr talked a lot about, the defense wasn't the problem. I just left the Mark Jackson playbook the way it was. I left the strategy the way it was, and he fixed the offensive end. So if they do that, Evan Mobley, Jarrett Allen, those two guys on the court together, Cleveland had a 112.5 defensive rating, which is easily top 10. And it's also awesome when it's just one of them. 112.4 with only Mobley, 112.7 with only Jarrett Allen. Mobley played just 50 games last season. I think most people expect him to play more games this coming season. So as long as those guys are healthy and available, I kind of think they're just walking into a top 10 defense. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's even going to be higher when you take into account last season they lost Mobley for a large stretch of the season. I think I was going to say they also lost Garland, but that might have improved their defense. I think they have a top 5 defense, to be honest, with their talent level in terms of just those two Twin Towers. I am one on the belief, though, that they should have actually moved Jarrett Allen in the offseason and then go from there, because I don't know if their problem is the offensive end. I don't think they can build an offense with those two unless Mobley's going to really start to space the floor better. And I think that's more the big issue for them. But again, like you said, defense wasn't the issue. If Atkinson comes in and keeps their base defense the same, I think they're not going to worry about it. I think they're going to be fine. And I think they're going to have a chance of being an actual top 5 defense.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it wouldn't surprise me at all if they ended up in the top 5. And the interesting thing about moving Jarrett Allen is that I think he's better than Evan Mobley right now. But there's no question that Evan Mobley has a higher ceiling. And that puts him in a really tough spot, right? Where, okay, well, we've got Donovan Mitchell, who we just re-signed. He wants to win right now. We've been in the playoffs the last few years. Like we made this coaching change to try to improve the team, right? Not to take a step back. And if you trade Jarrett Allen, no question you're taking a step back in the short term, even if it means a long-term, improvements going down the line, which you and I agree on that. I think eventually they need to build around Evan Mobley. It just feels like, yeah, he needs to learn how to space the floor and stuff, but is that the best version of Evan Mobley?
Right.
Because I feel like, no, it's the best version of the Cavs, but it's not the best version of Evan Mobley. So they're in a really tough spot take a calculated step back. It's
actually the best version of the Cavs as well, in that sense of like, in the long-term future of what they're trying to build, because we just know it doesn't work. Right. We've seen it now enough, offensively, where offense sputters, come playoff time and things like that. So, and we saw how good Mobley was when he was the 5 and Allen was out. Like, I think it's pretty obvious, he is the 5. I think long gone are the days of these bigs coming in and thinking that they could be the 4. Remember, Wemby came in and played the 4.
Yep.
Right. And that was, he wanted to be the 4. And they kind of showed like, nah, man, ain't going to work. You got to be the 5. And when he switched over to being the 5, things took off for him on another level. Like, I think that's kind of the sort of the case study everybody has to start looking at. And I think the Cavs are making a mistake in just delaying this stuff, wasting another year in doing this. And I understand why. It's because Kenny Atkinson coached Jared Allen, got fired because he wanted to start Jared Allen over DeAndre Jordan, and the star players weren't having it in Brooklyn. So, like, yeah, he's reunited with his guy, and it doesn't want to kind of replace him in that sense, but I still think it's a mistake.
We agree. Long term, I think it's a mistake. Short term, they're still going to be a top 10 defense. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And of course, you get the rest of the great stuff that Game Time has to offer, like all-in pricing. Toggling this feature on shows the total cost upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. And with seat views, get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. With their lowest price guarantee, if you find a cheaper ticket, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. And with Game Time ticket coverage, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Number 8 on my list, I have the Miami Heat. It feels like a top 10 defensive list would be incomplete without the Miami Heat at this point. They just always seem to be in this mix. I do think so. They were 5th in defensive rating last year. Some of that I think was a little smoke and mirrors. They gave up way too many threes, especially from the corner, right? This wasn't a team designed to give up the above the break threes, and they were fine with the volume from there. No. They gave up a lot of threes that teams were trying to get against them. But opponents converted below a league average rate on those threes. So a little bit of a reversion to the mean in terms of 3-point luck. I think the Heat are going to just fall down this list a little bit more. They also didn't perform well defensively against some of the top 10 teams in the league. So they did most of their work against the bad teams, and they kind of padded their stats that way. The good news for the Miami Heat is there's still plenty of bad teams in the Eastern Conference to do that too. So I think the floor is really high. Because they also don't give up shots at the basket. They do not give up shots at the basket. The 3-point variance can kind of move them up and down this list depending on however that falls. Bam Adebayo, Jimmy Butler, Eric Spoelstra, they're just too smart to finish outside the top 10. I couldn't get them any higher than this, but I had to have them in my top 10.
Yeah, I mean, then it just comes down to, and it sucks because these are the questions that really annoy everybody, especially me. It's like, all right, how many games is Jimmy playing?
Right.
Like, they finished actually, pretty high in the top 5, and the fact that Jimmy wasn't healthy through most of the season and I use the word healthy loosely as much as he wasn't as interested. I think it's a big question there. Is like, how many games do you get out of these guys? Because they have the talent level. I think Bam would be in the running for defensive player of the year. I think that's something that's in the mix for him, year to year. And I think he can kind of really carry a team defensively. But if they have Jimmy on the floor for a lot longer stretches, they're going to be better. But I also think the loss of Caleb Martin is going to hurt them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's going to slow them down a little bit defensively. They're going to have to figure that stuff out. Is it, because they're going to end up playing Tyler Hero more minutes. That's going to hurt their defense. It's, how I like Jaime Jaquez, even though he went to a stupid college. And I think the sort of improvements from him we'll see, but it's like Hayward Highsmith, really good. Can he really make up for it when he's playing a lot more minutes than he is? Is the kid Ware, who's coming in, is he going to be a guy that can be counted on defensively in the NBA season? Like, there's a lot of questions with them in that sense. But again, it just starts at the end of the day, and it's the worst way to kind of deal with it is like, all right, how many games are we getting from Jimmy?
Yeah, so when Jimmy Butler was slightly more engaged after the All-Star break, they were number 2 in defensive rating, and that is proving your point exactly. But we don't know how engaged Jimmy Butler is going to be. I think a lot of people assume, oh, well, he wants his next big contract. He can opt out next summer. Okay, he's also 35 years old. Like, just sheer want to isn't enough when you get to 35, right? Like, you don't typically see players become better and more available as they get older, and that's what's happening with Jimmy Butler right now. Replacing Caleb Martin is a great shout, right? Because when Jimmy was healthy or not, Caleb Martin was drawing the short straw defensively. Like it was like, okay, you go guard Jason Tatum, you go guard De'Aaron Fox. Like he had to just guard all kinds of different players. Now that's going to fall on Haywood Highsmith. It's going to fall on Jaime Jaquez Jr., who was not good in one-on-one defense last year. He's an okay team defender, jumps some passing lanes. There's things that you like from him there. As a one-on-one defender, he got schooled plenty by some of the veteran scorers in the league. He just needs to be better. He's talking about it locally. He's like talking about how he wants to be better, but talking and doing is, two very different things. So they've got some ground to make up. But again,
they don't teach defense at that stupid school.
I love this. This is great. Did you know I have a John Wooden tattoo?
You have a John Wooden tattoo? What's wrong with you?
Not of his face or anything, but it's a John Wooden quote. Should I not have told you that? Did we just end the show?
Pretty much. I'm gonna you keep talking. I'll just scroll the internet for a while.
There we go. Number 7 on my list. I've got the San Antonio Spurs. I'm sure you were just wondering when this team was going to pop up. There are going to be a lot of people who are going to want to put them higher on their list. And that's where I started. I'll explain why I couldn't get them much higher than this, but the fact that they were last year bottom 10 for basically most of the season defensively, going all the way up to 7 would be a huge accomplishment for them. But the answer, the reason why is Victor Wembanyama, right? I don't need to beat around the bush here. 112.8 defensive rating when Victor Wembanyama was on the court last season. That would have ranked 6th in the NBA last season. It was even better when you had Victor Wembanyama and Devin Vassell on the court together, 109.6. That would have been number 2 in defensive rating last year. When those guys play, when Wembanyama plays, it's a walking top 10 defense. When they put their best defenders on the court, it's even better. We're talking about a defense that can be in the mix for the best defense in the NBA, and that's not even an exaggeration. I think Harrison Barnes and Chris Paul will help. Veteran know-how guys will be able to kind of direct the younger players in the right direction. My problem with the Spurs is that they can't defend a lick when Wemby is off the court. 121.4 defensive rating with Wemby off. They didn't really do anything this offseason, I don't think, at least to address that. And so even if Wemby plays 30 to 33 minutes per game, that's just 15 to 18 minutes where you're just going to basically give up everything that the opponent wants. And I do think it's going to be good enough to get them into the top 7, but not quite good enough to get to the upper echelon of some of these defenses that we're going to be talking about.
I think part of the reason why it's hard to put them even higher than that is the other defenses are going to be so goddamn good. Like, I think that's part of it. Like, I was curious to see if you were going to have them in your top 10. Really, because I was going to say that's the dark horse to put. If you didn't, I was going to be like, they should probably be in there.
Yeah.
Just because how good Wemby is. Now, I'm a little bit worried about Chris Paul's age and the fall off or whatnot, but I also like the kid Castle that they got. I think he's going to defend well. I think Vassell does a good job with that. They have Jeremy Sohan. It's, your point though, of when he's on the bench, them giving everything away is kind of the problem. And that's the issue. So if they just improve in that area marginally, they will skyrocket up the defensive rating rankings. I think that's just kind of the obvious thing in that stuff, because Wemby is the favorite to win the next 27 Defensive Player of the Year awards. So it's not like, he's going to retire and still be the favorite. I'm just telling you facts, folks, all the way. And I think that's going to be the case there. And I think, we're looking at that with him coming in and just changing the defense completely. And if they can improve just marginally, doesn't have to be massive, doesn't have to be huge, but 2 points better, maybe 1.5 points even better when Wemby's on the bench, you'll start to see them rise really high in that ranking. So I don't think it's wild to have them in the top 10, but I do think it would be kind of insane when the teams we're about to start talking about, and their defenses, it's harder to rank them above them.
That's exactly right. And they were 12th last year in defensive rating after the All-Star break, when it felt like Victor Wembanyama really had his footing. He kind of made that one little mini leap towards the end of the year. They were playing at the full-time 5, basically, getting rid of sort of playing up at the 4 like you talked about earlier. And so there's already a proof of concept here. It's just about, like you already said, improving on the margins. And that's where I think leadership of guys like Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes will help. Just having those guys in the locker room is just all right, let's really get down into the weeds of this film session. Let's really get into the game plans of this stuff. And it probably won't be enough to turn anybody into a supreme sort of defensive player on that roster, but it'll be enough to just move the needle in a little bit more of a efficient direction when Wemby's off the court, perhaps. So I've got, and you're absolutely right, by the way. I kind of had a note here. Like, this is like the top tier. I have like one other tier at the very, very top of this list, but this is kind of like the teams I expect to be the best defenses in the league next year by a pretty decent margin, even against the teams we already talked about. I've got the Knicks at number 6. They lost size with Isaiah Hartenstein leaving, which we'll talk about here in a second, but still have Mitchell Robinson, who was a beast defensively when he's healthy, especially at the beginning of last season. I mean, he was getting some DPOY buzz, I think, in like the first couple of months of the year. Then obviously he got hurt. You add OG Anunoby to the mix for a full season. If he could stay healthy, that's awesome. They had an absurd 101.8 defensive rating with Anunoby on the court last year, which is just, that's bananas. Mikal Bridges, they add him. They still have Josh Hart, still have Dante DiVincenzo. They're just competitive MFers on that defense who are going to switch everything, muck up everything, get everything into the mud. They're going to flatten out every pick and roll. They're going to fight over every screen. They're going to do whatever it is that they need to do. And you still have Tom Thibodeau at the head of this thing. They're always going to have a little bit of a defensive identity. I think Julius Randle is going to give them more effort on that end too. Will be interesting to see what these defensive looks look like with him at the 5, as Thibodeau was kind of talking about earlier. But there's just so much perimeter defensive talent that despite the questions I have interior, especially if Mitchell Robinson or Randall or any of these guys get hurt, despite that, I still think there's enough perimeter talent here and good coaching to keep them at sort of this in this range.
Well, one, I think, Tibbs is the second best defensive coach in the game right now. And I think that's kind of a no-brainer. I think he's just behind Spo. And you can argue that could be flip-flopped. I wouldn't be mad at anybody who'd want to do that. I think their perimeter defense is going to be so damn good, it's actually not going to be that big of a problem about their interior until there's injuries. Like, OG gets hurt, man. Like, that's kind of the concern with OG. It's been a while since we've seen him play a full season. He gets banged up. It's, Tibbs wears guys down.
And with OG, it's not if, it's when, right? Or for how many,
So it's like you are a little bit concerned with that stuff. But again, I just think they're so good on the perimeter. It's going to be so hard to drive on them. The rotations, the switching, and everything like that should be pretty seamless with that. I know teams are going to try to attack Brunson and try to attack Randall, but they're going to have a lot of areas where they're going to be able to protect those guys in large portions there. And I think that goes a long way for the Knicks there. I think they're going to be one of the better defensive teams. I think, you're right on that track there. It's going to be interesting. And they probably have 2 defensive player of the year candidates in OG and Bridges. You can make an argument for that. Doesn't matter, folks. Wemby's winning. But like the whole, but the fact that they have 2 candidates is something that most teams can't even really speak about. And I think that's really a big thing. And they're both on the perimeter. It makes a big difference for them.
My biggest concern with them is defensive rebounding. If they go small, crashing the boards, that could just be made difficult for them. Isaiah Hartenstein, losing him as a defensive rebounder is huge. And if one of these guys get hurt, if they play small, but that's where coaching comes in, right? That's Thibodeau. Hey, box out your bodies, get to the basket, crash, get there first, all those things. That's going to be the coaching part of it. And you can coach your way into a decent rebounding team. You really can. You're not going to be elite, but you could you could hover above league average.
I don't know so much if you can coach your way into it as much as these guys just have to go do it. It has to be their guards.
Yeah.
They all have to be there. They have to be,
yeah.
It has to be gang rebounding. I mean, that's going to be something he's going to preach and hammer and nail with those guys, but they have to actually do it. Like, they have to put in the work and bang the boards as much as possible. They need to be on top of it. It needs to be, Bridges has to have big rebounding numbers from his position. OG is going to be playing the 4.
I like Josh Hart and Dante DiVincenzo, man. Those guys, I said, MFers.
But they have to lead their position in defensive rebounding. Yeah. Like, it can't be really – that's the thing. That's the fall off with losing Hartenstein. Like, that's the thing. Like, you have to lead your positions in rebounding or be in the top 3. Like, that's how important it's going to be for the DiVincenzos, for the Josh Hart guys, and so on. Like, that's got to be the drum that Tibbs is banging on.
Today's episode of RealGM Radio is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. One Caleb Williams passing yard gets you 1 win on Prize Picks every week in September. That's right, only 1 yard gets you an automatic win every football weekend in September. 4 weeks of free W's. Don't miss this deal on Prize Picks because it's gone when September ends. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in most states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. You want to play Prize Picks alongside Drewski, Joe Budden, MMA champion Sugar Sean O'Malley? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Download the Prize Picks app today, use the code CLNS, and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Number 5 on my list, the return of the Memphis Grizzlies. We're back, baby. They were second in defensive rating 2 seasons ago when they were healthy and without, before all the John Morant stuff. They did lose Steven Adams, but they did also add Zach Edey. This is me kind of betting on Zach Edey doing enough to help replace Steven Adams, which just as a reminder, he's 7'2", whatever he is. Like, the guy's huge, and big humans tend to help defensively. So I like the addition there. I think he'll be able to help right away. Vince Williams, who I think is an underrated wing defender, is an element that they didn't have, 2 years ago. They still have Marcus Smart kind of replacing Dillon Brooks from a couple years ago. But I think Taylor Jenkins, they hang their hat on defense. This is a defensive-oriented team. It is their identity. It's, hey, let's just stop enough let's get enough stops so that John Morant can win the game for us on offense. I think they're going to do all of that. So there are some injury concerns with this roster, G.G. Jackson, Brandon Clark, things like that. But I think they're going to be back to being a top 10 defense because they just always were when everything was just normal. And I almost kind of just throw away last season.
You kind of have to with just all the injuries that they had. It's a season that you need to forget for the most part. And it's actually led to a lot of people forgetting about the Grizzlies in general, which I think is kind of perilous that to just do. I like what they have defensively around Ja because that's the weak point. Right, is Ja. Like, what are we doing defensively here? How are we covering for him? And I think that's something I always kind of look at on defenses is like where do you make up for the guys that aren't good defensively? And I think that's a big one there. And Ja's going to still pick off steals on the weak side or whatnot. I think steals is an overrated stat when we talk about defenses, but that's just probably a pod for another day for me to be a curmudgeon. But the whole concept there, they have a foundation of guys that are solid defensively, and then it'll come down to Marcus Smart and his health, and not just his health. He's getting up there in age, man. Can he keep doing it? Can he keep kind of jumping in and dive into all of that? It's going to be an interesting stuff, but I think with a combination of Edey and Jackson rotating on the weak side, the big thing I am worried about with Edey though is when teams get him out in space, how well will he do defending in the perimeter? Because that's going to be the other thing. Early on, teams are going to test him there, and it might be a thing he could test it all season, and it might work out for them. You know how, like in football, like you have a cornerback you constantly throw up against, like, okay, they got this guy, we're going to keep attacking him, and he gets better through the course of the season because he's gotten so many reps of teams attacking him. Maybe Edey gets better. Maybe he doesn't, and he sucks, and they can't play him. I don't know, but like that's I still think in the long run he's going to work out just nice for them and be a good Adams replacement.
Yeah, this is a little bit of a bet on a rookie who we've never seen at the NBA level being functionally good enough defensively. But the good thing about being in Memphis is even if he does get dragged out on a high screen, you do have somebody like Jaren Jackson Jr. to clean things up on that backside, one of the best sort of help side defenders in the league. I also think you could throw Marcus Smart down there, depending on what's kind of going on the court, where kind of what Boston did, kind of using Drew Holiday as sort of that low man a little bit. You can have Marcus Smart in that situation also because
I'm going to fight that. I'm going to fight that. There are two different levels of basketball defensive IQs there. And as tough as Smart is, he ain't on Drew's Holiday. That is a different level.
Fair
and
enough.
I know I'm almost positive Boston's going to be in your top 3, I hope. And we can discuss it there, but like I don't know if I'd put Smart in that position.
Not claiming that he's as good as Drew Holiday. Never will. Although he, for some unknown reason, does have a Defensive Player of the Year award, and Drew Holiday doesn't. But
that's all Seth Partnow is doing.
It's him, and it's the Boston media mafia who could get they can get I don't know.
But once they got one outside
Xavier
the
Tillman
mafia,
a Defensive Player of the Year.
Once they got one outside the family to start doing their bidding, it changed.
That's the one that Bam got stolen from him. That was Bam's. He had the Defensive Player of the Year stolen from him. Anyway, there's enough here, and I think there's going to be really interesting linemen that they can get to. I mean, you were talking about when you have a player like Ja, the question is how do you cover up for him defensively? And the answer in Memphis is everybody else does it, because everybody else, that's really a key rotation piece for the most part. You know, I don't know how much Luke Kennard is going to play or whatever, but is a plus or an average to plus defender, right? And there's going to be lineups where even if Edey is off the floor, they can go Jaren Jackson, Vince Williams, Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart, Ja Morant. Like there's enough there where they could be good defensively. And like none of this is breaking news. This is what they did 2 years ago before the crumble it up and throw it in the recycling bin season. So I think it'll look closer to what it looked like 2 years ago. You mentioned the Boston Celtics. I do not have them in my top 3. Oh. I have them in my top 4. And there's a simple reason for this. So the Celtics they have not finished outside the top 3 in 3 seasons in defensive rating. The only reason I'm dropping them a spot here is because of the uncertainty around Kristaps Porzingis and Al Horford being like 48 years old or whatever he is. That's the part that worries me a little bit with them, is if Porzingis is going to miss 2 months, and just because he misses 2 months doesn't mean he comes back and just plays the rest of the games. That's not how this works. Not with any injury, and certainly not with Kristaps Porzingis. So if he's just sort of in and out of the lineup and Al Horford's there, and it's just like a lot of Xavier Tillman. It's a lot of Cornette. It's like a lot of that at center. I think that they could be a little bit more vulnerable than they were last year. Now, not by a lot. They finished 3rd last year, according to Cleaning the Glass. I have them 4th this year. So I'm not saying like this defense is going to go in the garbage, but I do think we have to account for it a little bit. And dropping them 1 spot, I think, was fair enough. So I have them slipping, not by much. It's similar to the Knicks thing that we're talking about. There's just so much freaking talent. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Drew Holiday, Derek White. They are going to stop so much of that penetration where the rim protection isn't going to matter as much, but rim protection has to matter a little bit. So I just have them slipping 1 spot.
Yeah, no, you're crazy. Just as long as Derek White and Drew Holiday are there defensively, like it's a nightmare. And like I said, like you said, Tatum and Brown are still there and also very good defensively. I think they get just enough rim protection from guys like Tillman and Cornette in the way that they're getting, but it's also off the bench. And you have Pritchard being his annoying little self running around. And not like he's a great defender, but his hustle and effort kind of takes you another level. But just having those two of Derek White and Drew Holiday, I think that's a top 3 defense.
So let's explore this, because I'm willing to be talked into it, right? But the 3 I have in front of them, who would you bump out? So number 3,
I already tell you right now, you bump Orlando.
Okay, so that's who I had at number 3. Number 1 in defensive rating after the All-Star break last year, with Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs, and Jonathan Isaac on the court together, they had a defensive rating of 106.5, which would have been number 1 by a mile last year. Now, obviously, those guys aren't going to play all their minutes together, but we saw them lean into that more as the season went on. So I just think we'll get more minutes than we got total last year of that alignment. And then they add Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who's a solid defender. I know he's getting up there in age, but he's still a solid defender, and he's better than what they had last year at that spot. So that's why I had Orlando. Maybe I was thinking about this too black and white. I'm like, okay, well, Orlando, they were really good last year. They were the best defense in the league post All-Star break, and they added a piece. And Boston lost a piece, at least for a few months, with Kristaps Porzingis. So I just had Orlando barely sneaking by Boston here. But you could talk me into moving Boston to number 3. I wouldn't be against it.
I would just when we go look at Orlando, it's how much of it can they replicate that? This is a young team, right? And also a young coach, and they need to focus on the offensive end more, right? So I could just see slippage in just their coverage defensively, just on the fact that they have to focus on actually, scoring the ball, which was a massive problem for them. and then the lineup you talked about, like how many minutes do we get from Jonathan Isaacs? And with his injury history and everything like that. So you have to be concerned about that. And how many so it's like that's a good 15-minute run. But what are you doing the next 33 minutes? Like you're really kind of trying to figure all that stuff out. They have a great defense. Like it wouldn't shock me if they finish even number one, in defensive rating. Like they're going to be a top 4 defense to me. For me, if I had to pick, I'm taking Boston's defense over Orlando's. And it's because, one, it's full of veterans, consistently the same each night. And the level that they play at defensively, and even with the Tillman and Cornette and the rim protection questions that we're talking about, still going to have Al out there, right? Still got him, and it's not like a complete just zero for them. Like I think they're going to be just fine in that situation. I think we're a little bit overblown with it. The only thing I would say for the Celtics that scares me more than anything else is just a championship hangover.
Yeah. Totally.
That would be the one thing that would maybe concern
me.
And
when you see teams deal with the championship hangover, it usually comes on the defensive end because that's the harder place to engage. Offensively, they'll still shoot threes and do everything that they do. I think I had them number 2 when we did the offensive rating predictions last week. But this past year, it was half of a point per 100 possessions that separated Orlando and Boston. So 3, 4, whatever, they'll be right in the same mix. Qualitatively, they'll essentially be just as good. I've got Minnesota number 2.
Right.
Okay, so I think we're going to agree on number 1 then. So I've got Minnesota number 2. Do I really need to do the sales pitch on this one? They're awesome. They had the best defensive rating in the league by 2.6 points per 100 possessions last year. That was the difference between first and second and 11th in defensive rating last year. Like they were just far and away the best defense in the league last year, according to Cleaning the Glass again, which filters out all the garbage time stuff. I'm a little worried if I had to find like little worry points, which I tried to do with all these defenses, about the Dillingham minutes. We're not sure how many minutes he's actually going to get, but if he gets any, he's going to be a target. Mike Conley just getting older, being another year older, but I still think Anthony Edwards, McDaniels, like these guys just are young. They keep getting better. It feels like, and this team can just go through stretches of dominance that no other team can reach. And you kind of string together enough of those stretches. And that's why they were number 1 in defense last year. And it's why they'll be number 2 again this coming season.
I think it's more of a concern of how much will they miss Kyle Anderson, right? Like him coming off the bench really kind of helps to sort of stabilize things for them defensively with what they have. But I think they're right in the mix. Like, honestly, the top 4 can go in any order, but that's the top 4 to me, and I think that's sort of the way I look at it. Just when you have Rudy, and he showed it last year, you're going to have a good defense. You're just going to walk into a good defense, when he's on the floor because of what he can do at the rim. And
when you have Karl-Anthony Towns, just kidding.
No, but like on top of that, like
pairing,
just to kind of rotate over, it helps a little bit. But then you also have like the fact that Anthony Edwards is a 2-way player. Which I'd like to refer to as a basketball player, and we should start talking about these other teams as other guys as one-way players,
right?
Because that's the way the game is supposed to be played. You're supposed to play on both ends. It's not freaking football. But the
sounds like a John Wooden quote.
Don't get slapped. The whole thing is though, but like he's aggressive defensively. We saw what he can do in that stuff. McDaniels is great, like defensively with how they play. Conley's a little bit older. We're going to start to kind of see maybe a little bit of a slide there. But overall, I just think they're in the perfect position to be a good defensive team, and top 4 is probably right where I'm at.
And a lot of this stuff is buy-in also on that end. Like you're talking about, like basketball players, you're supposed to play the defensive end of the ball. When this team got all the way, when they made the Western Conference Finals last year by way of their defense, that they're going to be bought into doing it again. And so, and for the length of the regular season. So I think, I couldn't move Minnesota any lower. Great point though. And that's kind of how I thought about it too. Like these top 4 are going to be basically interchangeable. Although I feel really good about Oklahoma City's defense, and they're going to be number 1 in my predictions here. They were 4th in defensive rating last season, and then they add Isaiah Hartenstein and Alex Caruso. There you go. That's really the argument. I mean, their best lineups, the ones that they're going to lean on in crunch time and in the biggest moments, are going to feature all plus defenders, more likely than not. They have multiple options, not just with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Alex Caruso, Lou Dort, J-Dub, Chet Holmgren, now being able to be more of a help side defender, which I'm very excited to watch how this kind of plays out. Isaiah Hartenstein, and what he provides them in terms of defensive rebounding. I mean, this is a team in the bottom of the league in defensive rebounding rate last year. Isaiah Hartenstein, when he was on the Knicks were 6th in defensive rebounding rate. And a lot of that was because of Isaiah Hartenstein, who was just a beast on the boards. He's just going to basically fix that issue probably day one. And go ahead.
It's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
I mean, let me just, before they got Hartenstein, once they got Alex Caruso, I was like, all right, this is the best defensive team in the league. Like, it's that simple. You know, they've upgraded from what was a target in Giddey to a solid defensive play, like damn good defensive player. Like, this is a team. It's going to be a tough night for offenses when they play OKC. Like, and just the multiple different lineups they can get to. Yep. Sometimes, you know, Hartenstein comes off the bench and you have Chet at the 5 and, you know, rotate, play them together, play them separate. This, you know, all the other guys that you can kind of go to across the board where it's like, this is going to be amazing. And then it frees up Shea even a little bit more to conserve energy and go at it on the offensive end. I think there's going to be a fascinating thing. To me, this is definitely I will be shocked if they're not the number one defense. If they're not the number one defense in the NBA, and if they're not in the top 3, something seriously went wrong with their season.
They understood the assignment going into the offseason, and then they executed the assignment. They did it early. Like, this is like coming home from school, knowing that you had a bunch of math homework to do, and you're like, I'm just going to knock it out as soon as I get home. Before I even eat a snack, before I go play with my friends, I'm just going to knock out my homework before. And then you have the rest of the evening to relax and hang out and watch cartoons and whatever. Like, that's what the Thunder did. They're just like, okay, we know we need to replace Giddey, and we know we need some size. Boom, boom. Caruso, Hartenstein knocked it out. And so this went from a team with some targets like Giddey, right, with some vulnerabilities in terms of teams like Minnesota, Denver, that can beat them from going small, a little punish Chet Holmgren in the middle and not having much size around him, to a team that replaced Giddey with Caruso, again, a minus defender to a guy who was on the all-defensive team last year, and adding one of the better defensive rebounding guys and big men that were available in Hartenstein. And so they get rid of that small ball sort of vulnerability, or I guess more rather going against bigger teams vulnerability. I'm looking at their rotation. There's one kind of minus defender in the entire group, and that's Isaiah Joe. And I wouldn't even qualify him as like a total. He's not great, but at least there's some size there or whatever. But like everybody else, Kesson Wallace, like everybody else, at least at the very least, competes defensively. And there's a number of these guys who are going to make a claim to be on the all defensive team. There's no weaknesses. And so when you're able to roll out lineup after lineup of 3 to 4 awesome defenders, 5 awesome defenders at a time, you're going to cruise your way, I think, to the number 1 defensive rating.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect too is they don't take anything off the floor offensively.
Right.
I think that's the scarier part for everybody else in the league. It's just like, okay, well, like normally if you have a defense like that, or you add a guy that's that good defensively, it hurts you somewhere else. It doesn't in this case. Like it's such a problem for everybody else. Like I think this is going to be a big one. It's going to be a fun season for OKC.
It really is. Well, I was so excited to do this with you. Let's cruise through the top 10, just sort of a recap, and then we'll get out of here. But number 10, I had the 76ers. Number 9, the Cleveland Cavaliers. 8 were the Miami Heat. 7 were the San Antonio Spurs. 6, the New York Knicks. 5, the Memphis Grizzlies. 4 and 3 were the Boston Celtics and the Orlando Magic. We'll kind of interchange those. I had Minnesota at number 2, and the Oklahoma City Thunder will be the number 1 defense in the league by defensive rating by the end of next season. Those are our predictions. That's Mo Dakhil. You can, again, follow him on Twitter. He's a must-follow on Twitter. Read him at The Athletic. Read him at Bleacher Report. Mo, do you got anything coming out? Anything you want to plug here?
Nothing right now. Just, stay tuned. Just follow me on Twitter. I do TikToks. I walk the dog. I come up with my random thoughts. So you can come find me on TikTok as well.
Before it's banned.
Dog. We'll see what happens.
All right. Follow Mo and his dog on TikTok. Thanks, Mo, man. This was fun.
Oh, thank you for having me.